All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Don't Stay Silent. I am Monique Braham-Evans, and we have a very special guest for you today. Actually, you're in for a treat because you have Momo times two. Monique Jackson is with us. And for those who don't know, I actually grew up with Monique. We went to the same middle school together, and so it's great that we've been reunited. And I told her about this video content series, and she did not hesitate to get involved, and she was very clear on what she wanted to talk about, which we're going to get into today, systemic racism in healthcare. But Monique, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I am Monique Jackson, and I work in healthcare. I've been working in it for a couple of years, but more than anything, I am an advocate for social justice, Black women's health, Black women's magic, everything and all things that are about my people, about my Jesus, and about my family. So I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. All right, so let's get right into it and talk about COVID. So whites comprise 62% of the U.S. population, ages 45 to 54. Yet only 22% of COVID-related deaths were white people. According to the Brookings Institute, Black and Latino COVID-related deaths are at least 6 times higher than that of their white counterparts.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people were surprised by these findings when they were released. In general, non-people of color. Mm-hmm. Does this shock perhaps serve as a greater indication? And if so, of what?
I think so. I think it serves as a greater indication of a couple of things. One, social determinants of health, right? So social determinants of health are access, are, your whether or not, you can take off of work to get testing, whether you still have to go to work because you can't work from home, whether you have transportation, whether you have, they talk about virtual healthcare, whether you have a phone to be able to access this virtual healthcare so that you can talk to a professional. But also I think it's, systemic, right? Because we have these populations that we know are underserved, but people are standing out with fake police uniforms in Black areas, like in Kansas City, Missouri, where people were turning away because they saw cop-looking folks standing around the entrance to getting tested. And so you have not only the probability that folks can't get to the places that they need to get tested, don't have the money to be able to take off work to not be at risk, but also you have people who are standing there trying to discourage them from getting tested. And then even though it's zero copay, even though you can go and get tested many times and not pay for it, some of these people don't know that information. So they're worried about how much they got to pay, doctor's visits, all that other stuff. And then by the time they get there, if they are diagnosed, they're already on the fast track to dying because they've not had the opportunity or the access to get what they need.
Absolutely. It's almost as if though there was this unawareness of privilege before. And it's very apparent now.
Yes.
Totally. Is it fair to make bridges between, just based on your last response and a couple of things that you touched on, is it fair to make bridges between the practice of redlining and keeping people of color outside of certain communities, taxes and the distribution of resources, education, the level thereof that one receives, occupations, which one would qualify for as a result of that education, and ultimately the access to and the quality of healthcare?
Yes, all of those are along the same line. They just plucked and vibrate at different frequencies, right? So it's literally the same thing. Just like when people talk about, that everybody's so upset about, they always want to bring up like Black on Black crime and how we should be talking about that and not talking about how there's systemic racism and police officers are killing us at an alarming rate. But what they're not talking about when they talk about Black on Black crime or white on white crime, which never became a thing because why would we talk about either of them? Violence is perpetuated intra-racial. So There's an 84% chance that a white person is going to kill a white person. There's a 93% chance that a black person is going to kill a black person. Why? Because violence is perpetuated in the communities that you're in. So if you're talking about the fact that, oh, maybe there's still segregation, yes, there is still segregation because they put us in these communities and we don't really cross those lines. The people who cross those lines are the people supposed to protect us. But we have this just line of demarcation that says they don't deserve something because they don't have the money. They live in lower income housing, right? They might have Medicaid. They might have Medicare. We don't know what they have, but even in those government funded programs, you still have a lack of access because there are people who are not even using that, right? So you have people who can't even get to the Medicaid, Medicare side. And even then, there's a bias on that.
Right.
So where you live matters. Do you have access, right? I have a place down the street that I can go to get whatever I need. I have multiple places. I can go to the CVS. I can go to the urgent care. I can go to the hospital 2 minutes down the street. I live in a central area, but I also live in the suburbs. Someone who lives, in lower income housing, can they get to those places from where I live? Yes. But do they have the money? Do you have money to pay the entrance fees? They charge you $100 if you have asthma just to use the little mouthpiece to breathe into.
Jeez.
So imagine what they're charging you for COVID. And supposedly you're not supposed to see a lot of these bills, but we know that's not the truth.
Right.
We know that the healthcare system is set up to supposedly help us, but we are a large portion of people are so priced out or go and have these pre-existing conditions. So they like to put on their labels, if you have these pre-existing conditions, you are not covered by X, Y, and Z, when they know those pre-existing conditions are prevalent in the African-American community.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh, you touched on something that made me think of my growing up. So after I left Hackensack and I moved to Teaneck and I was in that school system, I remember at Teaneck High School, they had black doors and white doors. Now, I thought that was just literally the colors of the doors, but really and truly, it was a description of which side of town, with Route 4 being right there by the high school. Are you facing the black side of town or the white side of town? And when I was in college, I graduated from Seton Hall University and I took a business law course. Shout out to Professor Shannon. There was a case study that we did. It was about 20th century real estate and how they were guilty of redlining and making sure that they kept those communities separate between whites and blacks. And it's still present today. All these many decades later, the damage is still done. And so there is this segregation between Teaneck. There really is. And it's just crazy to see how that one thing, it trickles down. You know, it's like if you pull a thread, all of it's going to unravel.
It's all going to unravel.
Right into the healthcare.
All interconnected.
Yes. All right. That also, hold on. I just thought of something else. I started this job when COVID was already a thing. I started at the end of March. And with my old job, my last 2 weeks was actually done at home because one day we just didn't know that we weren't coming back to the office.
Exactly.
So I had to return my equipment back and I had to get to FedEx to do that. And I was so nervous. I had my gloves on and I had my mask on. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to go. I have to return this equipment. And when I got to the FedEx over by the Newark airport, I think there was the shift change going on. And I saw just the sea of people in uniforms, black and brown people. And meanwhile, I'm so like in fear of catching COVID. and these people were just reporting to work. And it was an eye-opening moment for me that made me aware of my own privilege, that I was in a position to work from home. But for a lot of people, they don't have that. That's not their story. And so I bring up that to say that privilege is a real thing, and we have to be aware of what other people's circumstances are. And so the things that you talked about, I may live here, but there's people who live, you know, in X, Y, and Z, and that's their experience. And just because it's not your experience doesn't mean that it's not a real thing.
Yes, amen.
I digress. All right. So research has shown that Blacks are much less likely to trust their physicians and or hospitals, and as a consequence are less likely to seek treatment or to even follow the recommended treatment plan. In an article from The Hill, Dr. J. Corey Williams, some 3 years ago, shared some alarming facts. In comparison with white Americans, Blacks are 3 times more likely to die of asthma. Mm-hmm. Blacks have a 25% higher cancer death rate. Blacks tend to develop chronic disease earlier in life. And overall, Blacks have a shorter life expectancy. I want to ask you, what is trust's role in this, and why is it so important?
I think trust is the biggest role, right? Because not only do we not see people who look like us on a regular basis. So how do you understand my life? We're going into a situation where, as we talked about privilege a minute ago, you have these privileged people telling me what I'm supposed to do, telling me that I've just worked from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. maybe. I got some kids that I got to take care of. I have to help them get their homework done. I got to cook food. And maybe I have an income that doesn't allow me to buy organic, or to buy non-GMO, or to buy all these vegetables and things that you want me to buy when I have to make it stretch. And so you're now telling me what I need to do, and I need to go for runs, and I need to go on exercise, machines, and buy a membership to gyms, and you're so out of touch with my reality. How am I supposed to listen to anything that you're saying? How? Because my life and my health is determined by the money that I have, determined by how I can get places, what I can do. And so when you automatically see somebody telling you that you're less than, and that you need to do all of these things when you don't understand my life and you don't want to understand my life, why would I talk to you? I'm going to talk to Big Mama over there, and I'm going to ask her what she did. And then me and Big Mama, maybe we'll go on some walks. Maybe we'll do, but I have my main goal. And that's why it's so important to understand that access is not just the only problem. Trust and feeling heard is just as big of a problem as access. Because we go to these doctors and we say, I have a pain in my back. Oh, there's nothing wrong with you. Just put some ice on it, maybe put a heating pad on it, and just go to sleep and try and sleep on different sides or whatever. And you tell them multiple times over and over and over again, I have a pain in my back. I have a pain in my back. They tell you the same thing. Nothing's wrong with you. Then you finally go to a different doctor because you're tired of hearing nothing is wrong. Maybe you go to a chiropractor. I went to a chiropractor and I said, my back hurts. And he said, okay, he was Black. I'm going to send you for an MRI. I'm going to send you to a pain specialist. I'm going to send you here, and you need to come here 3 days a week so that I can adjust your back. We found out I had 2 herniated discs in my back, 2 herniated discs in my neck, and bad stabilizing parts of my body. But nobody else heard that. No one. But I went to a Black doctor who heard me and did something about it. So I trust him. Now I don't like going to other people. And then once you find someone that you trust and you finally give them your all, they retire. They go someplace else. They move. They're out of network now. And you can't go to these places. So now you have a problem of lack of insurance. I think people die from lack of insurance a lot of the time, right? Because especially if you're on government services or government plans, they change your doctor. My uncle, for instance, he was going to the doctor. They changed his plan. He couldn't go to the doctor who understood his condition. So he was always in crisis when he went to the one that was in plan. He was in crisis for over a year. And it's my contention that he died from lack of insurance.
Wow, so sorry.
Because he couldn't go to the people who could treat him anymore. So
Serious
it all matters.
ramifications. Yes. Wow. You touched on something which we're going to get into a little bit later, but just thinking about this skepticism within the Black community, I think that it's worthy to talk about the history of that, because it goes really far back. You know, when you think about Henrietta Lacks and how her story for a large part was unknown until HBO partnered with Oprah Winfrey to do that movie, or even, you know, the Tuskegee Airmen, and that history, and how we were tested upon and just watched. You know, we were a science experiment, and this whole notion of Black bodies being disposable. I wish I could say that it's a thing of the past and that was then and this is now. I think you still see a bit of that today, unfortunately. Anything you want to comment on about that and the history?
I mean, look at what they're doing with COVID, like the COVID-19, what is the thing called? Vaccine. They said they wanted to test it in Africa.
Right.
Why is it us? Why y'all gotta come to the Black folk and stick our arms so we can die faster? Like, I feel like there's some kind of quote unquote natural selection they're trying to do.
Yes.
And that's, you know, the whole idea of like COVID and the fact that we didn't have testing in our areas, the fact that we have governors in areas that like Atlanta that are opening up places that they know that Black people will frequent, barbershops, hair salons, bowling alleys, all of the places that we would go, they opened first. And what happened? All of the cases went up.
Right.
In all of the areas, Atlanta has a high population of African Americans. What did they do? Open the schools. What happened? 900 people had to be quarantined after they opened the schools. Right. They are using the tools that they have to still use us as test dummies by doing things in our areas, in our communities, to see what it's going to be. You just gave 900 kids coronavirus so that you can see that the white kids shouldn't go to school yet. Right. That's just what they do. And it is pitiful and terrible and something that I wish we could get a handle on. I wish. But the one thing we can do is try and vote for our local government.
Yes. Right.
So that'll help. Get these racists out.
Well, and at all levels. Don't just
all levels, from the top to the bottom. But let's be clear. The president, yes, that needs to change. 100%. But we also need to take into account our local governments, our senators, our mayors, our governors. These are the people who are in the other branches of the government that are making these laws and decisions for us. We need to vote out the bad ones too.
Yes. Clearly. Oh my gosh. So you talked about with this distrust, how there's also this misunderstanding. That brings me to the biological profile, right? Body mass index, or the appropriate weight and height by age. These were built on white standards. So what is the impact of that on other communities?
For that, that's like us being told that we're terrible all the time. Us being told we're too fat. Us being told that the reason we're this, we have these diseases. Us being told, oh, your pain doesn't matter because that's how your body was supposed to be set up. You're fine. Us being ignored on every single symptom that we have. And my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. She had found her stuff her own. She had multiple mammograms, and they didn't find it. And she kept saying, something is wrong, something is wrong, something is wrong, something is wrong. And she found it for herself and then went back and had to get tested. Like, it is a serious thing that we have going on that nobody really wants to talk about. This white profile that we're held to as a standard of rightness. And that goes across the board, right? We're talking about health and body, but that goes across the board. And what we look like, how our lips are, how our noses are, eyes, you know, and how we have a different way of settling into our body. Like, some people are never going to be thick. Some people are never going to be skinny. And it is the genetic makeup of their bodies that make it so. And if they actually get down to the level that these people are telling them they need to be, they look sick, and they are sick.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to have a doctor who's willing to talk to you about what your body is, what your body makeup is, and what the right goal is for you, not based on the standard that is inaccurate.
Right. You made a thought just pop into my mind, and it's not so much about the numbers that we're held against, but this perception that is had of us. So I was at my doctor's office, and they were going digital. So instead of having these paper files, they were putting everything in the system, and they decided that they wanted to just, you know, confirm that all the information is correct. So I'm sitting there with the nurse, an older white woman, and we're going over the family history portion, right? As that's important. And we talk about, you know, well, your mom's family history, and then she goes, and your dad's family history. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you even know who your dad is?
Oh, no, she didn't.
Yes, she did. Yes, she did. And I was just like, wow. Would you ask this of any other patient if it weren't a Black woman?
Oh,
No.
Yes, I know my daddy.
Unbelievable.
I can't. These people, and then they start asking you, and then it feels like that's like, I bet you if somebody came in there and said that they were like, that they had been raped, that they would blame the person. Mm-hmm. And if they had been raped and they were African American or brown, that same person would say, well, what did you do for the person?
What did you have on?
What did you have on? What were you wearing? Do you have family? Do you have a father? Like, that's the question. That's why we don't go and talk to nobody. That's why people who are raped don't go and report it, because there's this victim shaming that's out there that they're going to do. And if you're Black or brown, it's going to happen more often.
Yes.
And they're not going to believe you, and they're just going to send you home, and you got to deal with the trauma, which is why mental health is so important, and a stigma that we have in our community and others as well.
Yes. Which needs to be addressed, and it needs to be done away with. Seriously, truly. But sticking with this notion of perceptions, and even misconceptions, and how dangerous they can be. Back in the 1740s, yellow fever was rampant amongst coastal cities. And Dr. John Lining had made an observation that those who were afflicted by the disease were almost exclusively white. The Africans that were held in captivity as slaves were just not impacted. That led to weaponization of disease. And my question to you is that just a relic of the past, or do we see some of that weaponization still today?
Well, I think we do. I mean, just going back to the conversation about access to, you know, COVID stuff, right? COVID testing, and, you know, going to the hospital and being seen instead of being sent home. Like, it might not be weaponization of that actual disease, which if you talk to some people, they're saying that it is a weapon and that it was purposely made and purposely sent to America from whomever. I don't know who made it, how it got here, but they're saying that it is a weapon, and I don't know if I believe it or don't. I'd like to believe more of humanity, but I do believe that the access to the right care is being weaponized by our president and local governments.
Absolutely.
And getting the PPE and making sure, and the people who are out here on the front lines, who do you think they are? They're Black and brown. So everybody who's sitting there for the longest while, for when we were quarantined, I did not order a single thing from Amazon. I didn't order anything because I was like, people are out here driving these trucks, touching these packages, getting all this stuff, and have to be out here. And it just made my heart hurt.
Yes.
And so, but then at a certain point, I was just like, but they need to be paid too. And they need to do this. They need this job. And if they're out here, they have to do it. So I was just like, well, let me order me some Amazon Prime and see what I can do. And I just tip everybody really well. Because if you out here, and then I always say, thank you for your service. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you putting yourself at risk so that I can sit at the house and protect my parents.
Absolutely. I remember seeing LinkedIn posts and social media posts about why don't you just stay at home? And there was this blaming of the Black community and the Hispanic community when they were just trying to do their jobs and provide for their families. And then there was another layer of it too, of this blaming of the Asian community. And it was just really, really sad to see. And which is why I feel like, you know, yes, yellow fever was from the 18th century, but I can still see some of that trickling down to today with how we deal with disease and when it comes to race relations. It's really crazy. So sticking with this topic for a little longer. And you kind of touched on this earlier, and I said we'd get back to it, and I'm sticking to my guns. I'm telling the truth. Talk to me about ideas around race and immunity and whether or not they still linger. And by that, I'm talking about what you had referenced and touched on, this idea of pain thresholds, this idea of literally having thicker skin, and eventually this dismissal of complaints.
Yeah, that, like, I think that it happens to all of us, because, like, if you think about the history of medicine, right? We talked about Henrietta Lacks and how her DNA is what formed modern medicine as we know it, right? The study of what she had in her body, her biological profile in these double helix is what we use to understand a lot of what we know in medical history today, right? And she was not paid for that. She wasn't honored for it until now. And even still, people won't, use her name and say what her impact was. But in that same vein, Black women were used as test dummies in the beginning of gynecology to, test things out and look inside and, cut things out and do shock treatments and do all of these things because we didn't feel pain as other people did. We had a higher pain threshold. And in this journey in my life, I used to think that I loved the fact that my pain threshold was higher, so I didn't have to deal with, but that's me perpetuating the problem. Because now they're like, oh, you're fine. But so it takes me doubled over in pain, crying and in tears for you to do anything about it. When I say I have shooting pains, you're like, that's just your nerves. Okay, maybe it's not though. If I feel it, why are you not checking? Why are you not doing some tests? Why do my feet have to swell? Or why do I have to have, blood dripping down my face for you to see me? And even then you make me sit in a waiting room for hours, right? Because we have this perception, or the world has this perception that we don't feel pain. And then you have these stereotypes and tropes of the strong Black woman or the militant Black woman that we're expected to take on the weight of the world because we can. And that's why we have, as a community, a problem with being vulnerable, a problem with asking for help. So it's mental and physical. They have jacked up our brains and then jacked up and to talk about, to help with our body thoughts, like their thoughts of our body. Yeah. It's ridiculous.
So the whole notion of dismissal of complaints made me think about how Black women are 3 times more likely to die from a pregnancy-related issue than white women. And we think about some very high-profile stories, horror stories, if you will. Allison Felix, the Olympic champion, Serena Williams, the most Grand Slam titles ever, regardless of gender. And more recently, Jodie Turner-Smith, the actress, she said there's no way I'm having my baby in a hospital. We are doing this at home because I am not going to be a victim of systemic racism. So my question to you is, if money, because clearly these women have plenty of it, if money can't buy healthcare equity, what is the solution?
That is the $1 million question to which I wish I had the answer to. And I would say the first thing is having more Black and brown people in leadership and going to medical school and becoming doctors and becoming therapists and having an equity and a seat at the table, right? The only way we're going to change systemic racism and how it permeates each of the systems is to permeate the system ourselves. Mm-hmm. But also not only permeate the system, but we need to figure out who these white folks are and get them on our side, right? Because Black people are not going to change the narrative on systemic racism as much as we want to. It takes the white folks to be on board with Black folks so that we're all realizing that we bleed the same blood and are talking the same language so that we are all advocating for the same thing. And it's never going to be buddy. It's always going to be, you look like you, in my mind, I'm just like, you were in the fields, you were not in the fields, you should be stronger, so I'm not going to listen to you. You know, you just go back to work. You just go and do that. Whereas, oh, you feel like you're a little bit more fragile. Let me talk to you. Let me think about you. No. Money means nothing. If you Black, you Black. They will let you die the same being a multimillionaire as having $2. You just might have more access to, you know, a better hospital, right? And that's the thing that drives me nuts, right? You have better access. You have more money. You can have a whole wing of an entire hospital shut down, but you can die just the same as the woman who works at who works in her hair salon and, you know, has her mortgage or her hair salon and does all this work and still has to go and do every job under the sun and deal with whatever you throw at her and is in the room with somebody else. Mm-hmm. Not to say that she's not making bank, but it just doesn't matter. The continuum of what your money prospect is doesn't matter when you're Black. You're just Black.
Unbelievable. And just to make it hit home, if you could please share that stat about how that maternal mortality for Black women actually looks in New York City.
So in New York City, Black women are 12 times more likely to die of pregnancy-related issues when they're giving birth. And then there's a higher infant mortality rate in New York City as well. And there's a higher infant mortality rate across the board for Black children as well, because they're losing both the mother and the child.
It's a serious issue, which I feel like it just doesn't get enough visibility. And with that, I'd like to ask you, because that's what this platform is all about. I'm going to ask you, don't stay silent about, and I want you to fill in the blank. Right? I got this from Braham-Evans. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Don't stay silent about.
Your power and your voice. Make sure that you are advocating for yourself, because if nobody else is in the room that's for you, you need to be for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Don't stay silent about.
Your body, your aches, your pains, your mental health. Be vulnerable. Talk to someone. Be clear about what is going on. Take notes. Put it in your phone if you have to. Understand what's going on in your body so that you can be your best advocate.
Yes. And last one, don't stay silent about.
Don't stay silent about, this last one, your privilege. Mm. Because we all, especially depending on the platform, if you can watch this, it's possible/probable that you got some privilege, right? You have access to a computer, you have access to internet. me, I mean, if we talk about colorism, right? I'm a lighter skinned person, so I have privilege because I'm lighter skinned. I have privilege because I have a job I can work from home at. I have privilege because I have a car. I can get to where I need to go. I have my gynecologist phone number so I can text her for what I need. I have access. And so understand your privilege and understand that sometimes you have to speak for people who are less privileged than you are. And you should do that.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, Monique, this was great. We touched on a whole lot of things. My, oh my. And we got into some history. Thank you so much. But to the audience, again, I started doing this because I felt like people were being so vocal, understanding what was going on in the country and in the world. And it's really important that you do advocate for yourself, as Monique had said. And so I encourage you to do the same. Don't stay silent. This has been a pleasure. Monique, thank you. You've been great.
Thank you.
Thanks, LinkedIn fam.